Some people spend their entire lives waiting to feel like they belong. They keep showing up to the gathering, keep trying on the group, keep hoping that this time the door will finally open and they'll be pulled inside where everyone else seems to already be standing. And it never quite happens. Carl Jung studied people like this for decades, and he came to a conclusion that sounds cruel until you understand what he actually meant. Some people aren't meant to belong. They're meant to walk alone, and the solitude they keep treating as a wound is actually the shape of their purpose. This isn't about being antisocial. It isn't about being broken or unlovable or bad at relationships. Jung was pointing at something far stranger. He noticed that certain individuals carry a kind of inner fire, an intensity of awareness, a refusal to sleepwalk through life. And that fire, as much as it lights their way, also sets them apart from almost everyone around them. They can warm themselves by it, but they can't hand it to anyone else, and they can't put it out just to fit in. Jung knew this pattern intimately because he lived it. During the most important years of his life, the years that produced nearly everything he'd later become known for, he withdrew almost completely. His colleagues thought he'd lost his mind. His reputation suffered. He spent long stretches in near-total isolation, wrestling with contents of his own psyche that he couldn't explain to anyone. And later he described those years not as an exile he suffered, but as the price of admission to who he actually was. Today I want to walk you through what Jung understood about the people destined to walk alone, why it happens, what separates this kind of solitude from ordinary loneliness, the specific reasons certain people can never fully fit into the groups that shaped them, and why the aloneness that feels like a punishment might be the clearest sign that something in you is trying to become whole. Because if you've spent your life on the outside of every circle, quietly wondering what's wrong with you, Jung would offer a different question entirely. What if nothing is wrong? What if you're simply built for a path that most people never have to walk? Let's start with the thing almost everyone gets backwards. We treat loneliness as a math problem. Not enough people. Add more and the loneliness disappears. So the person who feels alone throws themselves into crowds, joins the club, fills the calendar, surrounds themselves with warm bodies and background noise. And somehow, in the middle of all of it, the ache gets worse. They're standing in a room full of people, and they've never felt more like a stranger. Jung saw this constantly, and he said something about it that cuts straight to the bone. He wrote that loneliness doesn't come from having no one around you. It comes from being unable to share the things that feel most important to you, or from holding views that others find inadmissible. Read that again slowly. The loneliness isn't caused by absence of people. It's caused by the presence of something inside you that has nowhere to go. This is the first key. Some people carry an inner world so vivid, so demanding, so alive with questions and perceptions and intensities that ordinary conversation can't hold it. They try to talk about what actually matters to them, and they watch people's eyes glaze over. They try to share the thing burning in their chest, and it comes out sounding strange, too much, too intense for the moment. So they learn to keep it inside. They smile, they nod, they perform the small talk, and every performance widens the gap between what they show and what they are. That gap is where the loneliness lives. It has nothing to do with the number of people in the room. You can be married and surrounded by children and lifelong friends and still feel it, because the ache was never about company. It was about communion, about being met at the depth where you actually exist. And most people, through no fault of their own, simply don't live at that depth. They're not ready to. Jung didn't think this made them lesser. He thought it made them different in kind. And that difference is what condemns certain souls to walk a stretch of road alone. Here's where it gets more difficult, because the natural response to this idea is to feel superior, to decide you're one of the deep ones and everyone else is shallow, and that's why you're alone. Jung would stop you right there. That inflation, that quiet arrogance, is not depth. It's the ego trying to turn a painful reality into a flattering story. The people destined to walk alone don't do so because they're better than others. They do it because something in them refuses to stay asleep, and staying asleep is the entry fee for most forms of belonging. Think about what belonging actually requires most of the time. It requires agreement. It requires you to laugh at the same things, want the same things, fear the same things, pretend the same things aren't happening. Every group runs on a set of shared illusions that no one questions out loud, because questioning them is how you get pushed to the edge. And most people gladly pay that price, because the warmth of belonging is worth the small daily act of not seeing. But some people can't not see. It's not a virtue they cultivated. It's closer to a condition they were born with or forged through early pain. They notice the thing everyone's agreed not to notice. They feel the tension under the pleasant surface. They can't laugh at the joke because they can see who it's wounding. And this seeing, this stubborn awareness that won't switch off, quietly disqualifies them from the comfortable unconsciousness that holds most groups together. Jung had a word for the lifelong process this kind of person is caught up in. He called it individuation, the slow, often lonely work of becoming a genuine individual rather than a reflection of the tribe. And he was blunt about its cost. You cannot individuate while remaining fully merged with the collective. To become truly yourself, you have to separate from the mass, from the borrowed opinions and inherited beliefs and the comforting hum of everyone agreeing. And separation, by its very nature, means walking alone for a while, sometimes for a very long while. Consider the child who could sense every mood in the house before a word was spoken. The one who knew when to disappear, when to soothe, when to become invisible. That child developed a radar for what lies beneath the surface of people because their safety depended on it. And that radar never turns off. 30 years later, they're at a dinner party, and while everyone else hears pleasant conversation, they're picking up the resentment under the wife's compliment, the fear behind the husband's bravado, the loneliness in the host's relentless cheer. They're not trying to, they simply can't stop. And this makes ordinary social life a strange, layered, exhausting experience that they can never quite explain to the people sitting right beside them. That's the second key. The people destined to walk alone often developed their depth as a response to something, a home that demanded vigilance, a loss that cracked the world open early, a sensitivity they were born with that the world had no place for. Their aloneness isn't a personality flaw. It's the long echo of having seen too much, too soon, and never being able to unsee it. Now, Jung distinguished sharply between two things that look identical from the outside, but feel completely different from within. There's the loneliness that eats a person alive, and there's the solitude that heals them. Same physical circumstance, one person, alone. Utterly different inner reality. And learning to tell them apart is one of the most important things a person on this path can do. Loneliness, in Jung's sense, is what happens when you're cut off from others, but also cut off from yourself. You're alone, and there's no one home. You sit in the silence, and it's full of hunger, full of the sense that life is happening elsewhere, that you've been left out of the party the rest of humanity is attending. That kind of aloneness is genuinely corrosive. It's the ache of exile. Solitude is something else entirely. Solitude is when you're alone and you finally have room to hear yourself. The noise of other people's expectations drops away, and in that quiet, something in you that had been drowned out begins to speak. Jung once wrote that solitude was for him a wellspring of healing that made his life worth living. He didn't mean he liked being by himself in a casual way. He meant that the deepest medicine he ever found was available only in the silence, where no one else's voice could reach. The tragedy is that the person destined to walk alone often spends years trapped in loneliness before they ever discover solitude. They fight the aloneness. They resent it. They chase belonging that never satisfies, and every failed attempt confirms the story that something is wrong with them. And they never realize that the aloneness they're running from is the very door they need to walk through, that the wilderness they keep trying to escape is the only place their real self can be found. Jung's own withdrawal is the perfect illustration. When he broke from Freud and lost the professional world that had defined him, he entered a period of such profound isolation that he genuinely wondered whether he was going insane. He had no map, no community, no one who understood what was happening inside him. And rather than flee that emptiness, he went further in. He sat with it, wrote through it, followed the strange images rising out of his own depths. What most people would have experienced as a breakdown, he allowed to become a breakthrough. Everything he built afterward came out of those solitary years. The isolation wasn't the interruption of his life's work, it was the soil it grew from. This is the reframe that changes everything. The aloneness isn't the obstacle standing between you and your real life. In many cases, it is your real life, insisting on being lived. It's the space being cleared so that something authentic has room to grow. But you only discover that once you stop treating the solitude as an enemy and start treating it as the strange, difficult teacher it actually is. If any of this is landing a little too close to home, if you felt that gap between who you are and what the room around you can hold, there's a resource that might help you sit with it differently. We put together a guide called True Self-Discovery, 24 reflection exercises drawn from Jung's approach to exactly this kind of inner terrain. It's built for the person standing in the solitude, unsure whether it's a wound or a doorway, and it's designed to help you listen to what the quiet is trying to say instead of drowning it out. You'll find the link just below. But let's keep going because there's a deeper layer to this that most people never reach. The people destined to walk alone almost always go through a specific and brutal recognition at some point. They realize that the loneliness isn't going to be fixed by finding their people. This is a hard thing to accept because the whole culture promises otherwise. Just find your tribe, they say. Somewhere out there is the group that will finally get you, the community where you'll finally fit. And for some people, that's true. But for the ones Jung is describing, it's a beautiful lie that keeps them searching for something the search itself can never give them. Because the fitting they're looking for would require them to become smaller, to dim the fire, to agree to the shared illusions, to stop seeing what they see, to trade their awareness for acceptance. And every time they've done it, every time they've contorted themselves into a shape a group could hold, they felt the specific misery of being surrounded and still absent. Present in body, exiled in soul. It's a worse loneliness than being physically alone, because at least when you're alone, you're not betraying yourself to maintain the illusion. Jung understood that for these individuals, the task was never to find belonging in the ordinary sense. The task was to develop a relationship with something inside themselves that made external belonging less necessary. He called the deepest center of the psyche the self, not the ego, not the little I that manages daily life, but a vast organizing center that connects the personal to something far larger. And he found that when a person made genuine contact with that inner center, the desperate hunger for outer belonging quieted. Not because they'd stopped needing connection, but because they'd found the one connection that the crowd could never provide and could never take away. This is the third key, and it's the one that turns the whole thing around. The person walking alone isn't walking toward permanent isolation. They're walking toward a different kind of companionship, an inner one. A relationship with their own depths so solid that they can enter a room full of strangers and not feel like a beggar hoping to be let in. They can connect where connection is real and withdraw where it isn't, without falling apart either way, because their center of gravity has moved inside them. They're no longer looking to other people to complete a self that was always meant to be completed from within. And here's the strange twist Jung noticed. Once someone finds that inner center, their outer relationships often improve dramatically, but not the way they expected. They stop chasing. They stop performing. They stop trying to squeeze belonging out of people who can't provide it. And in that stillness, the rare individuals who can actually meet them at their depth begin to appear. Not many. There were never going to be many. But the few who show up are real, and a handful of real connections is worth more than a lifetime of crowded loneliness. The paradox is that you have to stop needing the crowd before the true companions can find you. Let me name something uncomfortable here because it matters. Not everyone who feels alone is on this path. Sometimes, loneliness really is just avoidance dressed up as depth. Sometimes a person hides from connection out of fear and then tells themselves a flattering story about being too deep for other people. Jung was ruthless about this distinction, and honesty demands that we are too. The genuine article, the person truly built to walk alone, doesn't avoid others out of fear. They've usually tried, desperately and repeatedly, to belong. They've bled for it. The solitude found them, not the other way around. And they can tell the difference because the fear-based version wants to be talked out of the aloneness, while the authentic version knows, somewhere deep, that the aloneness is carrying them somewhere they need to go. So how do you know which one you're living? Jung would point you toward a simple, difficult test. When you're alone, truly alone, with nothing to distract you, what happens inside? If the silence fills with panic, with the frantic need to reach for your phone, to fill the space, to escape yourself, then there may be avoidance mixed in that needs facing. But if you sit in the silence long enough and something in you slowly begins to unclench, if you find, underneath the initial discomfort, a strange relief at finally not having to perform, then the solitude is doing its work. It's not exiling you from life, it's returning you to yourself. There's a particular pain that comes with this path that almost no one warns you about, and I want to speak to it directly. It's the pain of watching other people move through life with an ease you've never known. The way they slot into groups without thinking, the way belonging seems to cost them nothing, the way they can want simple things and be satisfied by them. You watch this from the outside and something in you aches because it looks so effortless, and you wonder why the same doors that open for them stay closed for you. Jung would tell you that ease is not the same as depth, and that the very thing making your path harder is the thing making it yours. The people who move through life effortlessly are often carried by currents they've never questioned. They belong because they never stepped outside the collective long enough to see it from a distance. And there's nothing wrong with that. It's simply a different journey. But you were called out of the current early, whether you chose it or not, and the loneliness you feel is the loneliness of someone standing on the bank, watching the river, unable to unknow what the distance has shown you. You can't go back into the river. That's the part that hurts. Once you've seen from the outside, the innocence that lets people belong without cost is gone, and no amount of trying will restore it. But Jung believed something crucial about that loss. He believed it was the beginning of consciousness itself. To become aware, really aware, is to be separated from the herd, because the herd survives on not seeing, and you can no longer not see. The loneliness is the shadow side of a light you didn't ask for, but now have to carry. And carrying it is the whole task, not extinguishing it to fit in, not pretending you don't see what you see, not spending your one life apologizing for the intensity that is your actual nature. Jung watched too many gifted, perceptive, alive human beings spend their years trying to shrink themselves into a belonging that would never fit, growing more hollow with each attempt. And he watched a smaller number make a different choice: to accept the fire, to stop fighting the solitude, to walk their strange road with a kind of dignity instead of shame. Those were the ones who eventually found their way to wholeness. There's a moment that arrives for people on this path, and it's the turning point of the entire journey. It's the moment you stop asking, "What's wrong with me that I can't belong like everyone else?" and start asking, "What is this aloneness for?" The first question keeps you trapped in a story of defect, endlessly measuring yourself against a norm you were never built to meet. The second question opens a door, because the moment you assume the solitude has a purpose, you start looking for it, and looking, you begin to find it. For some, the purpose is creative. The aloneness is the pressure that produces the work, the art, the writing, the thinking, the building of something that could only come from a person willing to go into the depths alone and bring back what they found. Jung himself is the proof of this. The solitary years didn't just heal him, they generated a body of insight that has helped millions of people understand their own inner lives. What he suffered in isolation became a gift to the whole world. But he could only give it because he was willing to go where the crowd couldn't follow. For others, the purpose is a quality of presence. The person who has walked alone long enough, who has made peace with their own depths, becomes someone others can finally be real around. They've stopped needing anything from the interaction, so people sense they can drop their masks. They become a kind of refuge, the one friend you can tell the truth to, the person whose silence feels safe, the presence that doesn't demand you perform. The very solitude that isolated them becomes the source of a rare capacity for genuine meeting. They can be alone, so they can be truly with you. Those two things turn out to be the same skill. And for others still, the purpose is simply to become fully themselves, which Jung considered the highest achievement a human life could reach. He called it the privilege of a lifetime, to become who you truly are. Not who the group needed you to be, not who your family scripted, not the palatable, agreeable version that earns easy acceptance, the actual, unrepeatable person you were born to become, fire and depth and strangeness and all. And that becoming, he was clear, cannot happen inside the comfortable warmth of total belonging. It requires the wilderness. It requires the walk. If you felt yourself in these words, if the solitude you've carried is starting to look less like a defect and more like a direction, the True Self-Discovery Guide was made for precisely this stretch of the road. 24 reflection exercises rooted in Jung's understanding of the individual's journey toward wholeness, built not to pull you out of your aloneness, but to help you find what it's been trying to give you. It's a way of turning the silence from something you endure into something you can actually listen to. The link is right below. And now, let's close the loop, because there's one last thing Jung wanted the people on this path to understand. The aloneness was never a sentence, it was a shape. The shape of a life that had to be lived from the inside out, because the ordinary map didn't fit the territory you were given. And here's what nobody tells you at the start, when the isolation feels only like loss. The ones who walk alone are not walking away from love or connection or meaning. They're walking toward a version of those things that most people never get to know. The deep, unmasked, hard-won kind that only becomes possible after you've stopped begging the world to make you feel whole and discovered you can generate that wholeness yourself. Jung would tell you that the loneliness you've been carrying is not evidence of your failure to belong. It's evidence of a self too large and too alive to be contained by the belonging that was available to you. You were never rejected by life. You were called out ahead of it, onto a road that fewer people walk, because something in you was meant to become conscious in a way the crowd never demanded of itself. The fire that makes you feel so separate is the same fire that, tended rather than smothered, becomes the light you'll navigate the rest of your life by. And the walking alone, it changes as you go. In the beginning, it's exile, all ache and absence, and the feeling of being left out of the human party. But somewhere along the way, if you stay with it, if you stop fighting the silence and let it teach you, the exile quietly becomes solitude. The absence becomes room. The ache becomes a strange and steady companionship with your own depths. You look up one day and realize you're not lonely anymore, even though nothing external has changed. You're simply home in yourself, finally, in a way that no crowd could ever have delivered. So if you're somewhere on that road right now, still in the ache, still wondering what's wrong with you, still watching everyone else belong so easily while you stand at the edge, hear this clearly. Nothing is wrong with you. You're not too much or too deep or too intense or too broken for the world. You're carrying a fire, and the fire is the point. Stop trying to put it out to warm yourself at someone else's. Learn to walk by its light. The road only looks empty until you understand it was always leading somewhere, toward the one person you were always meant to finally meet, which was you all along, waiting at the end of the walk you were afraid to take. Some people really are destined to walk alone. Jung knew it, lived it, and staked his life's work on the truth of it. But the destiny was never abandonment. It was individuation, the long path toward becoming whole. And the ones who finally understand that the solitude was a doorway rather than a prison discover something the crowd, for all its warmth, will never know. That there is a companionship deeper than belonging. That there is a light you can carry into any darkness. And that the loneliest road, walked all the way through, doesn't end in isolation at all. It ends in a self so complete that you're never truly alone again. If you haven't yet, take a look at the True Self-Discovery Guide. 24 reflection exercises grounded in Jung's work, made for exactly the kind of solitude you might be standing in right now. Not to rush you out of it, but to walk alongside you while you learn what it's been trying to show you. The link is right below.